Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Wanted to do some quick intros first. I'll go ahead and start out and pass it over to you, Brad. So Brian Weiss, ITECH Solutions. We're an IT service provider out of Templeton, California, service the San Luis Obispo County. We service fully managed clients that are small businesses. We also have co-managed, more mid-market, where we help internal IT departments. And we try to drive positive outcomes with the effective use of technology. And today, we're here talking about financial and legal risks of noncompliance, protecting your business or practice. We have a bit of a healthcare focus on this one, as we are. It's one of our verticals we do focus on is healthcare. And Brad is here today to help with that discussion and share some of his experiences and wisdom. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Brad, that'd be great.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Nice to see you, Brian, and nice to hear your disembodied voice there, Pete. I'm enjoying that very much. I'm Brad Gross, attorney to MSPs, thousands of MSPs nationwide. I've been in that practice area for, oh, wow, I'm in my 25th year now, so I've been doing this quite a while. I've seen quite a bit. And so I'm looking forward to a discussion about compliance, because it's a major, major issue for tech companies, for companies of all types, and especially, as you said, Brian, especially in the healthcare area, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and just for the audience, some of you may not be familiar with the term MSP, but it is essentially an IT service provider, AKA managed service provider, and it's really where we take over the day-to-day management of your IT. As I mentioned before, there's the fully managed model as well as the co-managed. So yeah, let's hop right in. So I've got a list of questions here. I will be kind of referencing just to keep us on track a little bit, some space filler time, and make sure we touch on some of the things the audience, excuse me, is probably interested in hearing about. So,
By the way, before you do that, quick question
yeah.
to you. Are those soundproofing things behind you, or is that just a really cool design on the wall? Is that
I'm glad you asked. That is soundproofing. So
okay?
I'm actually starting a podcast, and it's not a shameless plug because this is my webinar, but in June, starting a podcast called The Tech Stoic. So we take
Very
a
cool.
stoic approach to technology, and I've outfitted my office to be able to handle sound from bouncing around too much, and even have a setup for some in-person guests. So I'm looking forward to that. But
Very nice. This is my studio right now. It
yeah,
was designed by nature.
yeah.
I figured it was such a nice day out. I'm in South Florida right now, so figured I would use this as my background today. But
And
anyway, I digress.
yeah, no, I'd be doing the same thing if I had that weather for sure. It is nice to be outside.
Hmm.
Um, all right, so let's jump in. What is compliance? I mean, it definitely doesn't equal security. So that's something to point out. It's really the identification of certain processes and policies you have in place to meet regulations that are required in certain industries. One of the ones we're going to touch on today is of course, healthcare. So the important thing I wanted to point out before we got started is that checking a box with compliance does not mean you're secure. But that being said, it is one of the ways you're measured with the level of security that you may have in place. And so one of the things that I wonder if people understand are, what are some of the items around hidden costs of compliance violations, right? And so I'm curious if you could dive into that a little bit, maybe from your experience, what you might have seen.
Sure. You know, as you said, just checking off a box saying I'm compliant doesn't necessarily make you compliant. In fact, it doesn't make you compliant. And I think that people are hesitant to engage in compliance solutions because of the cost, right? Both the obvious costs and maybe the cost that you just addressed on the hidden costs. In truth, the cost of compliance is it can be significant, at least early on, right? It's very disruptive as a as an implementation, because you're going to be changing processes, procedures, the way that business is done. You're going to have workforce and operational disruptions. You're going to implement security measures. You're going to outsource a lot of this to outside IT firms like MSPs and so forth. So the hidden costs of compliance, if you're doing it right, can be significant, but it's a peace of mind. For example, I live in Florida here, and we all around here, we all get hurricane windows. Hurricane windows are extremely expensive. You'd say, well, why get them? For the few hurricanes you get in the past 10 or 12 years, why would you pay all that money for special windows? Well, that's a fair point until a hurricane comes. And then you realize that, wow, for that investment, I'm now safe. And these periodic storms that come, you think, well, it was worth the financial investment. The same with compliance. Okay, compliance is very often viewed as just a simple cost center. It doesn't help you at all. But if you think about it in terms of, well, if a hurricane comes, will you be happy that you made that investment? I think the answer is virtually always yes.
Yeah, when I think about it and kind of putting my IT lens on and how we help clients is, security frameworks are really designed to protect data. And the data is what's critical for our operations with any organization, especially in healthcare. And in healthcare, we track a lot of sensitive data about patients. And so there's HIPAA guidelines for a reason. And when I think about threat actors out there, or hackers, some people call them, that want to get to your data, the traditional method that we had seen is really kind of holding it for ransom, encrypting it, and you having to pay to get access back. But when we think about compliance, it's really to keep that data safe and only accessible by employees of your organization, and the safe handling of that. And more recently, as IT companies like ours have improved tremendously on good backups, the idea of being held ransom because your data is encrypted, well, there's an easy out. We just restore from backup. But now you have data breaches happening, where the data is actually getting exfiltrated, and there's a threat of making that information public. So when I think of the healthcare space, really the idea is, why do we want to invest in compliance? Well, what happens if your data becomes public? What does that do to your reputation? What type of fines might you see? Is there anything you can speak to around that you've seen or experienced?
Sure. So, I'll take a little bit of a realist approach here, because what I have found is that a lot of organizations that don't want to or don't feel the need to invest in compliance, they cite two reasons. Okay, the first is usually, well, I'm insured. So I'm insured. So what does it matter if I'm not fully in compliance, something happens, I'm insured. The second is, I don't know anyone who's ever been arrested or sued for non-compliance. So, if no one else is doing it, why am I the one that's going to spend the money on it? Okay. And addressing that last point first, again, if we're going to be realistic here and talk about how companies really think about these things, there's a fair argument to be made that, the government doesn't really, these compliance agencies, they don't really enforce a lot of these compliance regulations. And the numbers actually bear that out. I think the latest numbers I think are from around 2022 or 2023, maybe, from Health and Human Services. But I know that back in 2021, out of some 64,000 compliance complaints, they investigated, 631. So if you think about that, that's about 1% of the complaints that they actually investigated, and a total of two cases resulted in financial payments and sanctions. So with numbers like that, you see these healthcare organizations turn around and say, why do I need to be compliant? Well, that's a fair point, okay? But there's a flip side to that coin. And the flip side to that coin is that if you're only looking towards regulatory authorities and what they may or may not find and what they or may not investigate, well, then, again, if we're being real here, yeah, I guess the odds are against that. But that's not really where the danger is. Yes, regulatory authorities certainly have the ability to impose fines and investigate you and so. Right. You know who else does? Plaintiffs' firms, lawyers, the dreaded lawyer.
Mhm.
Those are the guys that you have to worry about. Yeah, the government may or may not come after you. And with the cuts, I'm not being political now, but with the cuts that we're seeing in the government, do they have the manpower still to do it? That, I think, time will bear that out, and we'll see. But you know who has plenty of manpower? Plaintiffs' firms, right? Just watch TV. Sort of late at night, you'll see all the personal injury of the plaintiffs' firms that are ready to pounce on companies, including healthcare providers, definitely healthcare providers, that fall out of compliance, and as a result, there are data breaches. Yeah, the government might not find out, but when you get a class action for $25 million against you, that's really a problem. So the first argument about, well, the government isn't really looking at me that hard, so if I'm not fully compliant, who cares? That's not where the danger is. Okay? That's the dolphin in the water. There's a shark behind that. It's called lawyers. The second argument about, well, I'm insured. Yes and no. If you read a lot of these insurance policies that cover cyber liability policies, a lot of them either exclude, okay, these types of breaches, or if they don't exclude it, they say in order for coverage to apply, you have to first show us that you were in compliance with HIPAA, that you had the safeguards in place, that you had the processes and so on in place. If you can do that and then show that something happened, we'll cover you. But you see, there's that loophole. You have to be in compliance to get insured should something happen. So people who say, well, I'm insured, it doesn't really matter. No, you ain't. No, you ain't. You might not be insured if you're not compliant. So there's this fine print, and this is where a lot of companies get hung up.
I love that you called that out because you're right. Some people might be looking at it as like a gamble, and they're willing to take that risk because they feel like, oh, it'll never happen to me, right? And if you're leaning on insurance, thinking in case it does happen, I always have insurance. I think the next question goes back to an earlier point I made, that checking a box on your cybersecurity insurance questionnaire stating you have something just to get the insurance, but it turns out you really don't have that, you're not going to get insured for that claim, right? They're going to investigate. They're much more sophisticated now in their processes when these claims come in. They bring in a legal team, they bring in a forensics team. They want to understand how the breach occurred, what could have prevented it. Did they actually have everything they said they had in the questionnaire that should have prevented it? And the minute they find something, you're kind of having to dig into your own pocket to cover those costs and try to keep your business operational, not to mention the reputational damage that goes along with that, right?
100% right. Yeah. It's funny. I'm going to be in Las Vegas next week for an event. As you're talking, I'm thinking all these casinos in Vegas, they're not in the business of paying out for wins. That's not their business, right? If that was their business, they wouldn't be in business. Their business is collecting and making money. Same analogy to these insurance companies. They're not in the business of paying out claims. They don't want to pay out claims any more than a hotel casino in Las Vegas wants to pay out $500,000 to its winners. It doesn't want that. It'll advertise it that way, right? Come here, you'll leave smiling. Same with insurance companies. You're safe. You can sleep securely. We got you covered. But in truth, that's not their business. Their business is to collect the money and then have you jump through a whole lot of hoops, most of which you might not even be aware of, before they might pay out an amount that satisfies you. So if that's your business game plan, if your business game plan is, well, I'm going to get insurance and then, like you just called it, Brian, a gamble, if that's what you want to do, it's a very, very poor plan. The odds are heavily against you in that scenario.
Yeah, and I wonder too, just putting myself in the shoes as if I was a healthcare provider or a doctor, and what do I care about the most? I care about seeing a lot of patients giving them good quality care and having them return, right? And look at me as a professional that's going to guide them in whatever they need. And I would imagine, I mean, maybe this is more so with the younger generations that are growing up that are more, educated around the dangers of a lot of the threats out there happening. I would imagine part of that is, hey, as I see you as a doctor, right, are you also keeping the information safe for me? And I, there's always those HIPAA forms you sign when you see a doctor, and it's letting them know, hey, we're going to keep your information safe. Who else might you allow to see this info? Like my wife, for example, I'll add her to the form. She's allowed to call in and have access to my info. So they seem to have a process in place for that as far as who can see and access the info. If I have another doctor that needs info from one doctor or the other, I'm having to sign permission to allow that to happen. But threat actors don't have to care about those forms, right? They don't
Right.
have to follow those forms. And so where, you know, I would imagine from a patient, or I think customer service, but these are patients, of course, perspective, it could be almost something I would want to put up and be proud of. Like we take extra steps to protect your information here with good cybersecurity hygiene, and we're able to confidently check all the boxes when it comes to HIPAA compliance, right?
Yeah, what you're talking about is essentially a badge of credibility. And I
Yeah.
think that increasingly, as even medical services become fungible, right? I could go see this person, I could go see that person. They're both, first it comes down to who am I insured? Who takes my insurance? All right. Right. So now we've taken this list, we've narrowed it down to this. Well, within that list, yeah, there should be differentiation. I think healthcare providers would be wise to follow the business advice that every company does outside of the healthcare industry, which is differentiate yourself. Make your consumers feel comfortable, make them want to use your services. And certainly, Brian, I agree with you that if one of the things you immediately promote is not just the quality of care and so on and so forth, but the fact that we recognize the risks and we want our patients to be comfortable with those risks. And so here's what we're doing. Boom, 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 boom. And you lay it out or have some sort of notice where a patient might say, that's interesting. I haven't seen that before. And of course, that person will tell other people, I was in my doctor's office. I saw this. Well, who do you use? And here we go. I think that any degree of distinction is important, but cybersecurity, if it isn't already, will be one of the primary, right after what is the quality of my healthcare, right after that is how secure is my patient info? Where is it going? What steps is this facility taking to make sure that it doesn't end up everywhere else?
Mhm.
I agree with you.
So let's talk about like best practices, maybe. I mean, one thing I'll point out is that security and compliance isn't a destination. It takes resiliency, right? It should be something that is regularly checked in and inspected. We call it drift in our industry, from an IT perspective. What drift have we seen, or what new best practices have come out where we're able to secure things even better? I mean, when I think of a threat actor's playbook, it's you can think of almost like a football team. There's always offense and defense, and the offense is studying what the defense does so that they can out offense them, and the defense is studying what the offense does.
Offense does.
And so it's a moving target. They have new playbooks coming out, new ways to potentially gain access to this sensitive data. What have you seen as maybe some best practices around, we talked about hidden costs, right? We can always figure out what something might cost, but how regular, might something like this need to be addressed so that so a doctor or a healthcare provider can add it to their playbook to understand, hey, I need to be keeping eyes on this on a regular basis, right?
Yeah. So I think that in order to understand what the best practices are, which I'll touch on in a moment, I think first there has to be a recognition that the issues that keep those who are interested in it, that keep them up at night from let's say a healthcare organization, the things that keep the board of directors of an organization up at night are all relate to liability. And the important thing to recognize is that it can virtually always be mitigated or eliminated if organizations take the steps to do so. It's not one of these problems where you look at and you say, I can never be 100% secure. This is bigger than I can handle, so I'm just not, I'm going to take a hands-off approach. There's no reason for it. I mean, far and away, for example, the biggest source of data theft in the healthcare industry was hacking. Far and away, hacking, according to HHS, the statistics, far and away, it was hacking involving malware and phishing, right? Fake emails for those who aren't familiar with those terms. Fake targeted emails where you imitate or you falsely say who you are. You impersonate. Thank you. That's the word I'm trying to think of. Impersonate another, and then social engineer your way in for people to send money, disclose facts, disclose passwords, and so on. Hacking and that type of phishing campaign, all of those things can be addressed very simply. I don't know about simply, but they can be addressed by technology solution providers, right? The next most frequently cited way that data gets lost is where a medical company doesn't vet the companies it works with. So it is now releasing data into other companies' hands, and those companies themselves probably don't have the right processes in place. Confidential obligations aren't being fulfilled, and so data gets out. Again, these are the types of solutions that aren't problems that aren't insurmountable, right? We can start to say, well, from a technology perspective, there are solutions. From a human error, you fooled me once type of thing, there are cyber security awareness training solutions, and they're very effective. From a vetting perspective, companies should be more aware of the types of companies with whom they are dealing, to whom they are giving their data, right? They can ask questions, look at policies, and so forth, and even ask similar questions that insurance companies do. What are you guys using as your malware backup solution, your malware solution? Show me your processes, procedures. Tell me if you've ever been breached. You can actually do the same due diligence that your insurance company does. Your insurance company figured out a long time ago that they need to ask these questions before they will take on the risk of whatever it is. Well, healthcare organizations should be doing the exact same thing before they provide their data, bring in business associates, for example. Vet them, ask questions, send a questionnaire. If you don't get the answers that you want, well, maybe you will avoid the second largest source of data loss. So knowing all that, what are the best practices? Well, first best practice is identify and understand the risk, which is what this is all about, right? Understand the risk. The risk is high. It's not insurmountable, the problem, but the risk is high. And once you identify the risk, the next step, and bear in mind, I always recommend, and yes, maybe I can't be objective about this because I represent managed service providers, the companies that offer these types of services. I recommend that organizations bring in outside people to do what I'm about to say. Managed service providers. You can't police yourself with an internal police force. That doesn't work. You need an external group. So I think that as a best practice, one, after you've identified and you understand that this is a problem, two, find the correct solution provider that will provide resources and solutions to your specific risks. Now, if they do that, well, we could talk about what they should be looking for in those solution providers. But if they say, well, we want to start doing it in-house, what steps can we take in-house to start getting ourselves towards the compliance mold? It's really 4 overall areas. It's identify, protect, detect, and respond. Right? Identify, you have to identify your assets, identify the inventory, identify where your data is, where it's going, where it's coming from, how is it stored, how is it used. These, and we're running through it here in a couple of minutes, but these are major endeavors. So I don't say that flippantly, like, yeah, just identify it. You'll be fine. This is a major project. That's why I said third parties can often organize this better. But yeah, you have to identify your inventory, identify your assets, identify the sources. The next would be protecting them. Protecting them. Find the solutions that protect your assets in the way that you not only need them to be protected, but fit the model of how you use those assets. That fit the model of how you use them. Because not every health organization uses its data in the same way. Okay? So make sure the solution that you're pulling in meets and fits the way you're doing things. The next thing go ahead. I'm sorry. I was
No,
just rattling it off.
I'm agreeing with you. Keep going. This is great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you like that, you'll like this. So the next thing I would say is detect, right? Run tests. Don't assume that because you have a bodyguard at the door that no one's coming in the door. Maybe he fell asleep. Right? Who knows? The idea is that even though you've now identified the risks, the areas, okay? You've now implemented solutions to protect your data in the way you do things. Now you have to test it. And I would recommend at least twice a year, at least biannually, that every organization test its resources, test its defenses, run a simulation. You don't even have to announce it's a simulation, but okay, even if you did announce this is a simulation, at least you're going to stress test the solutions that you have in place. You'll stress test them for efficiency, for effectiveness, for timeliness, right? And then the fourth, of course, is that you have to have a response plan. That's the key. Every organization should have a response plan in the event that a data breach either is suspected or actually occurs. It is not the right time to try to figure out who we're going to call and who we should call and how long is this going to take. It's not the right time to run that analysis once a breach occurs. Or even if you suspect a breach occurs, that's not the time because these are major endeavors. So you need a response plan in advance. And I would say that those are probably the best practices that I could think of.
I feel like you hit the nail on the head. And, a couple things that I'm thinking about as you were talking is, the incident response plans are great, but are we tabletopping them? Are we doing tabletop exercises to actually go through the process and see if there might be any gaps, right? I think that's great. I think the pillars that you called out, or those steps definitely come from like a security framework. So it's good to make sure you're following some sort of security framework because, it's going to walk you through that process. And I think the other lens, kind of taking it high level is to understand that you can't adhere to a security framework or compliance with just technology. It really takes people, process, and technology. So I wonder if there's some providers or businesses out there that hire, internal IT or even outsource IT, and they rely too heavily that technology is going to protect them without realizing there's also the people and processes that are involved as well.
Right. Human error, human error, human interaction is still at the top of the heap when it comes to ways in which an attack was implemented and was successfully implemented. Yes, there is malware, that is ahead of the game when it comes to detection. I get that, but far and away, the cases that we get involved with, far and away, and by that I don't mean 6 or 7 out of 10. I mean 9 point something out of 10. At their heart involve human interaction, social behavior, or awareness on an employee's or a staff member's part that ultimately led. It was the Trojan horse. They let that horse right in, and that's how these things happen. So, yeah, I agree. I don't think you can just rely on technology. You have to rely on implementation of processes in the workplace. And technology can help do that, but ultimately you need a person one or maybe two people in the organization whose job it is to make sure it's implemented, right? I could I could offer you one of the best cybersecurity awareness training programs, okay, available. Pick your vendor. We won't name vendors here, but you know who they are, right? Do a quick search, you'll see. A lot of cybersecurity awareness training vendors, okay? And they offer, both human and AI constructed, gamified scenarios that teach employees about how to identify phishing attempts, what to do. That's all wonderful until a company is hacked to a fish. Well, let's say that they're fished successfully. You say, how did that happen? Answer, oh, well, this is a new employee. We didn't tell our managed service provider, our IT department, to train this person. So, yeah, you gave us one of the best awareness training programs, but they never saw it. Is that a technology problem? No, that's a person problem, right? That's a company problem. So not everything can be accommodated and mitigated with technology. You need to implement from a human level as well.
Yeah, it's kind of what I like to say a lot, inspect what to expect, right? And who's going to take ownership over that? We can't assume that even policies we put in place are automatically being followed just because we put them in place. How are the people being trained on them? And what technology do we have in place to help make us aware, or I should say help set up guardrails so that those policies are being followed, and then make us aware when we might be deviating or not following a best practice.
Agreed.
When I think of HIPAA, even for a brand new healthcare provider, any compliance framework for that matter, it might seem like a daunting task, but I want to go back to why compliance doesn't equal security. Is it's we're not expecting someone to be compliant overnight, and even if you do get compliant overnight, that doesn't mean that you no longer have to worry about looking at compliance on an ongoing basis. So, I would say, and to our earlier point, if we're relying on insurance as kind of that worst case scenario situation, we at the very least, starting out, want to meet cybersecurity insurance requirements, right? Now, if the insurance company realizes you're also a healthcare provider, they're typically going to expect more than that, right? More than just answering the questions on the questionnaire. What type of other HIPAA regulations are you following? But that being said, there's also this idea that, the first step, as you mentioned, is identifying what's in place, what's not in place, what are your current risks. They're not going to be able to be fixed overnight, but having a plan in place to get them fixed in a timely manner can actually help make you compliant. So just coming to the table and talking about this stuff and identifying the risks, I wonder if some people are worried about doing because they realize they might identify something that shows, hey, we are vulnerable. And there is that notion of, well, if no one knows about it, we can claim ignorance that we didn't know about it. But can you play that game really? I mean, can you
No,
speak to
you
that a little
can't.
bit?
No, you really can't. It's funny that you say that they don't want to bring in somebody who might identify the problem because they're scared of the what the resolution would entail, right? Which is ironically exactly why a lot of people don't go to doctors themselves, right? I don't want to know. I know I got a few pounds to lose, or I know I should be doing
Yeah.
something different, and I don't want the doctor to tell me what I really should be doing. So it's kind of ironic that doctors, physicians, medical groups don't want to call in the people who can help them identify the risks and address them. Look in the mirror. That's why people
Yeah.
aren't going to you. But anyway, um, can they just plead ignorance? The answer is no, because the standards really are not what did you know? If you knew something and ignored it, well, now you're into willful and recklessness, and yeah, the penalties for that could be far more severe than if you had no idea. But it's not just a black and white test of did you knew nothing or you knew everything. The standard is actually what you knew or should have known. knew or should have known. And it's the should have known where you'll get caught
Mhm.
because, uh, if you live in a high crime area, well, I never had anyone break into my house, so that's why I left my front door open when I left. Okay, well, you understand, right? Well, I knew this would happen. It never happened before, but you should have known. And that's the game that a lot of medical companies want to play, and they get burned because and that's where plaintiffs' lawyers take hold, right? They go after negligence claims. Negligence, standard dictionary. You Google it, you'll see it. It's breaching a standard of care, and the breach is usually where they knew or should have known the risk. So should have known is where you're going to get caught. So burying your head in the sand doesn't help.
Yeah, and we run into this, and we're trying to do our best. It's about getting the right people in the room with our clients. Is even things that we discover as an IT company, if we don't properly communicate that to the client and help them understand there's this risk we discovered,
Yeah.
now we've got kind of a liability on our end where we knew about something we didn't disclose to the client. And so I think it's very important for a provider of any size to be engaged with IT, whether it's internal or outsourced. It is a shared responsibility, right? It's
I'll, I'm going to go just one quick step
yeah.
further where you said that if you knew about something that you want to disclose it, and if they showed you knew about it and you didn't, that could be a problem. True. That's correct. But I'm going to take that and inject steroids into it to use medical stuff, I guess, right? Doctors' offices, medical organizations have an extra duty of confidentiality, an extra duty of, it's called an extra fiduciary duty, which
Okay.
most other industries don't have. So if a medical group and that their duty, their fiduciary duty is not just to do no harm and so on and so forth, but they have a duty of confidentiality and security. So if they put their heads in the sand, well, you could say, well, maybe knew or should have known. You have an extra step there. Not only knew or should have known, but it's your fiduciary duty to really investigate this kind of stuff. An IT provider might turn around and say, hey, we're just performing what's in the scope of work. We didn't look into anything else. We're an outside contractor, right? You told me to change a light bulb. I changed the light bulb. Doctors can't do that. They can't turn around and say, I didn't think about security because you're here for your shoulder. No, their fiduciary duty, okay, relates to the practice as a whole, not just the stuff that they're doing to you, the diagnoses and so on, but how they run their practices, right? The confidentiality, the security. And that is why doctors will be, and medical organizations will be in a much more difficult position, as opposed to if that same type of hypothetical that you brought up occurred in any other industry, you know, IT industry.
And you are right. I mean, doctors didn't get into the business to try to understand and be able to measure risk around IT, right? They're really focusing on human risk with health and whatever specialty they might be in. So I don't want to create the message that doctors need to understand IT inside and out, but more so be more engaged with IT and help allow them to let you understand the risks, right? That are apparent. And at the very least, you've got a framework. It's HIPAA. Let's make sure we're at least following that. There may be some risks even outside of HIPAA to discuss, but I think that's a good baseline to follow.
For
Do
sure.
you do you have any stories or experiences that you could share of kind of real life things that you've dealt with, maybe in the healthcare industry or related to our discussions?
Sure. So my perspective is not so much representing the healthcare providers, though we have and we do represent many healthcare providers. In this context of data security and breach, the best stories always relate to a healthcare organization that either didn't care about compliance or took the approach of, well, compliance is just a cost center, so we'll do the bare minimum, right? We'll just be a little compliant. And that's where the negotiations really start to get interesting. You know, you go to a health organization and you say you can't just be a little compliant. You know, technology solution provider here is offering A, B, C, D, E, F, G. This is not a la carte. You shouldn't be choosing A and G and F. That doesn't help you. Um, and if you put it sort of as you have to be compliant. There's no such thing as a little compliant, the same way there's no such thing as being a little pregnant. Doctor again, healthcare reference there. Uh, you're either pregnant or you're not. You're either going to be compliant or you're not. And if you're not willing to pay for the compliance, well, then we're just going to put you in the category of you're not interested in a solution. But if you are interested in a solution, then, and this is my advice to both healthcare organizations and the technology solution providers that help them, then the answer is this is the package you need. It's not a la carte. This is the package you need. That way, from the medical organization's perspective, they know we have a complete solution. Okay, we didn't do this piecemeal. We have a solution. From the technology solution provider side, okay, they can feel secure in that they're giving the medical organization a great solution, and there's never going to be hey, I thought I was getting this or I thought I was getting that. No, it's not included within the scope. Those kinds of discussions disappear because you're offering a complete package. So if I guess my parting advice and stories that relate to it are always involving trying to be a little compliant, doesn't work. Go for the full package on both sides.
Yeah, that sounds like something a doctor would recommend too when I'm coming in for a health check, right?
I don't know. I haven't been to one in 10 years. I'm scared of what they'll say. See, we're bringing it full circle here in the podcast.
Well, this has been amazing. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help have this discussion and educate, people out there that are wanting to learn more about compliance. Yeah, while we're finishing it up here, I just wanted to, as part of this webinar, obviously point out ITECH Solutions. We help healthcare providers that are out there. If there's anything that you heard that was interesting, you want to reach out, have a further discussion, we can definitely help around HIPAA compliance. Wanted to give you a chance, Brad, to kind of talk about your services. I have marketed this out on LinkedIn. I'm connected with the MSP channel and industry. We even have some MSPs on here. You want to talk about a little bit about your services?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been representing technology companies, managed service providers, technology solution providers for decades, plural on that word, decades. So we understand the technologies and the solutions that are out there and what's being offered. If there is, and I guess bringing it to be more relevant to what we're talking about here, we have represented and currently do represent healthcare organizations in their efforts to perform due diligence into technology solution providers. Right? They want to find out what the solutions are, how effective they are, what agreements are in place with third-party solution providers that might augment those services and so forth. So we are frequently called in by healthcare organizations sort of as the sharpshooter of their legal team to help analyze and explore issues related to IT compliance, IT solutions, and so on. So be more than willing and would be delighted to talk to anyone who would want to engage us for that purpose. If they mention this particular podcast, so I saw you with Brian Weiss, or I heard it, contact us. We'll give you a free consult. We're not going to charge you if you're coming to us because you saw this podcast and you thought, that's a great idea. I want to talk to them. So just mention this podcast and we'll talk to you for free.
It's time to close it down. We appreciate everybody for joining us. We will be announcing another webinar from ITECH coming up next month that will continue on this compliance and governance discussion. And it'll be a series of 3. So this was the first of 3. Brad, thanks for attending and joining Brian as a guest. And Brian,
My pleasure.
thank you for hosting.
My pleasure.